It's wonderful to see all of you here. We are hosting a 1-hour webinar, and this is hosted by the Subcommittee on Transportation Workforce Management, which is a part of the Agency Administration Managing Committee. And we are very excited to have you all here. We are going to unveil our workforce management playbook today. This is part one of a two-part webinar series, and both webinars are really designed to help prepare you for an interactive workshop at our July AAMC, or Agency Administration Managing Committee conference. So the conference is July, see, I've already lost the date, July 17 to 20. Yes, July 17 to 20. The 17th in the afternoon is the date that we'll do a workshop. We're planning to do a 4-hour interactive workshop that is designed to help state DOTs either fine-tune the workforce management plan they have or get started on their workforce planning journey. And so today we'll introduce the playbook to you, and then we'll have that playbook available for you as a reference to prep for your agency. And also, if you want to join our interactive workshop, you will have takeaways from the workshop that you can actually take back to your agency and apply. Our second webinar is scheduled in June, and it will be a report from the 3 pilot agencies who took the first draft of the playbook and applied it and said, you know, let's think about redoing this piece, or let's clarify this piece. And so those 3 DOTs were Minnesota, Vermont, and Utah. Thank you very much to those 3 states for the time they volunteered and committed to helping us with this. So webinar 2, you'll get to hear where those states are now and what they're doing in workforce planning. And that can also help you prep if you want to go to that workshop on July 17th in Long Beach. So hopefully we'll see you 2 more times after today. And in the chat, Trish has just put in the information and details for the June 29th webinar, which is part 2 of this series. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Holland. I have 15 years experience with the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. And I've worked for about 20 years in the transportation industry. I've served on several committees with AASHTO, and I'm currently an active member of the Transportation Research Board Committee on Information and Knowledge Management. So I've kept my fingers in the transportation industry, so to speak. I did retire in the fall of 2021, which was fantastic. And I lasted 3 days before I said, you know, I don't think I'm done working yet. And so I'm really privileged to be able to have found a way to continue to contribute to departments of transportation's journey, particularly in workforce. My background is in industrial organizational psychology and organizational leadership. And while I was working at the Alaska DOT, I served as a human resource manager, the chief finance officer, the chief operations officer. So I'm very excited to share this playbook with you today. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available online after today. We also will provide a PDF version of the playbook online after today. So all participants will get a notice with a link through email of where they can find the webinar and the playbook. I'll be presenting today with Keith McCusker from Vermont, and he will introduce himself when he picks up his portion of the webinar today. First, I just wanted to really quickly explain what we mean by workforce management. We've heard a lot of phrases. There's workforce development, workforce planning, workforce management, human capital plans, workforce strategy, human capital strategy. What do all of these mean? Basically, when we talk about workforce management, we are really focused on an integrated, intentional, and comprehensive plan for helping our people in the different agencies be the best they can be, so that they can learn, grow, develop and contribute to really help the DOTs meet their mission as effectively and efficiently as possible. Workforce development in the traditional definition focuses primarily on learning. So that would be your training, mentoring, coaching program. Workforce management includes workforce development, but also looks at talent acquisition. It looks at salary and compensation, employee recognition, a modern work environment. And it focuses on three big areas: the nature of the work that needs to get done, the workplace or the work environment in which that work is completed, and then the workforce itself, the individuals that we either have or need to be able to recruit in order for us to be able to meet our mission. And so workforce management is always ideally aligns directly with the strategic mission and goal of the agency, so that everyone, if you will, if we use an analogy, everyone's rowing in the same direction, so the boat actually makes it. Sometimes we can have different strategies that aren't connected or coordinated, and it can feel like people are just moving in a circle because they aren't all pulling in the same direction. So that's our idea of workforce management. We have a more technical definition available in the playbook, but just to let you know, kind of set the groundwork of what we want to look at today, we really are looking at the whole process, from the employee experience, from when they hear about us as an organization to when they decide it's time to move on to a different organization. But it also includes the life cycle of the organization itself, its strategic priorities, goals, and missions. The purpose of this playbook is to provide a starting point for state DOTs so that they can see the concepts that are involved in workforce management. It also provides them with some basic information to let them really begin to say, what can we do in our organization? What are we already doing? And how can we make this a more intentional and planned human capital strategy? The majority of the time today, we're going to walk through the playbook, and we encourage you to ask questions as you go. Trish will be managing the chat, so throw your questions in the chat anytime. She'll break in when it fits, and we'll try to answer questions as we go. This is really more of a town hall, so we'd love to have your interaction. We'll also have time at the end for question and answer, but please don't hold back. If a question comes up, pop it in there for us. We would love to hear from you. And we will start now with Keith, who is going to introduce the playbook to you. Keith, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Before I introduce the playbook, I'll introduce myself. As Amanda said, Keith McCusker. I'm a newly converted Agency of Transportation member here in Vermont. Joined about 6 months ago at this point, but have 2 decades plus worth of leadership experience in private sector, tech startups, managing teams, background masters of science and organizational leadership. Love all of that. I say amateur workforce enthusiast. Now I can claim professional workforce enthusiast, I guess. But very happy to have been in part of this project with Vermont Agency of Transportation and working with everybody on the playbook. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second here, and we'll jump right in. All right. Should be seeing the playbook and not my inbox.
We can see the playbook.
Perfect. I lost you for a second, Amanda, so I didn't know. All right, too many screens. Here we go. So, going to take everybody through a bunch of different sections within the playbook here, and as Amanda said, any questions, certainly jump in the chat or throw them out there. The first exciting part that I get to talk about is the table of contents. I guess it's not really all that exciting, but it helps illustrate what's actually in the playbook. And we'll keep coming back to these 8 steps in the transportation or in the workforce management model these 8 steps are kind of their own chapters. But before we get there, starting with this strategic alignment, we've got kind of an introduction, what you need to know, some prerequisites, how to use the playbook, getting started, even a kind of quick start guide that I'll take everybody through, and then we'll dive into the 8 different steps or the chapters here. And then I'll jump back in near the end and cover all the different appendices that we have as well. So what you need to know, and Amanda already kind of highlighted what Workforce is, and I guess I'll before I get into the playbook, I will just take a step back and say it's been super enlightening and fun trying to write a playbook for a very broad audience, some of which have workforce experience and are familiar with it, and at the same time wanting to write something that people who with no experience can take and use right away. So we certainly started kind of just explaining what is going on in the world, especially in the transportation workforce, with gaps in struggling to fill positions and retirement rates within agencies, and it's a global issue that we're all up against here in the next couple of years. So kind of started with that initial what you need to know, setting the stage, and then very quickly jump into the how to actually use the playbook. And this explains that 8-step model, like I talked about, the workforce management model. And again, each of these you'll see here in a second are their own chapters within the book, or in the playbook, excuse me. But we go through and we explain what each of these 8 are at a very high level here, and the other ones. And then we explain throughout the playbook some different icons that you'll see today as you're going through, and in the future as you're reading it, as just both from an editor or writer standpoint, a nice way to break up the blocks of text, but also a great way to have some visuals to help call out what's actually in the playbook. And then we've got in this section a DEI and a KM call out box, and that's certainly part of what's important today, or why a lot of you all are here today is you'll see we mentioned that we put a couple examples throughout this first edition of the playbook for these call out boxes, and we really want to grow and add some more additional ones in the second edition of this playbook. So certainly looking to those on the call as we grow in the future together in the subcommittee to get this second edition of the playbook together. We're going to look for some help from you all. And then we get into just some high level concepts of workforce management, what it is, why, which is always my favorite question, as long as it's not coming from my teenagers. Always important to ask why and understand what we're really doing here. And then getting into some more specific things within workforce. And again, this will all be available for you all to read, so we don't have to go through it. I'm just trying to scroll slowly so nobody gets motion sickness, car sickness as I scroll too fast. But here's what I wanted to show off is we purposely put kind of a quick start guide into this, and blame my tech background, but I always just want users to get in and get going as quick as possible. And so really tried to identify like what's the entry point, what's the easiest way that somebody can take this larger PDF and quickly get going within working on workforce. And so we identified that we really want everybody to at least skim the getting started, the beginning of the workbook, or the playbook, excuse me, and then think about their workforce, decide how they're going to move forward, and then using Appendix B, there's a great checklist that's really going to help them quickly hit the ground running. But for everybody else who's not going through the quick guide, or I guess those who are doing the quick guide, the next section we have is getting started. And these probably 4 rules are what I'll share are the most important we think about with this workforce efforts is, and so I'll just quickly talk through them and a question in the chat real quick. people not seeing? Let me stop sharing and reshare just in case that's on me.
I see it.
All right, still there? Okay, perfect. So the first rule here is avoid the temptation, and the fuller of that rule is to jump immediately to solutions, right? We're all a fixer people, right? We want to just get right into it and make things better and fix things. And there's a lot of prerequisite work that you need to put into Workforce before you jump right to that fixing step. The second rule, start with what you have. That's part of that prerequisite of taking the time, and we'll cover this in the playbook, but you might already be doing some of the things that are in here, and you're going to miss that, or either reinvent the wheel by redoing it if you don't realize that you're already doing that. So you've got to kind of stop and reflect on what you already currently have. And then the third one, focus on what's achievable. And I kind of tie that in with the fourth one, committing to the long haul, is that Workforce is not a magical quick fix overnight type of effort. It is something that we all are working towards over that long haul. And so what's achievable today, little increments, those micro improvements, those 1% improvements add up over the long haul. And so just need to kind of keep those things in mind as we talk about such a grandiose concept of workforce management. So beyond that, in the getting started, we kind of cover a couple of different things here. Again, just helping frame the users or the audience reading this around, again, what is Workforce and the type of things that they'll be working on and why. And you can see an example of one of those call outs right here, just referencing that in Appendix C, we've got a project charter template for you where you can dig deeper into this. So I'm going to pause for a second, mostly because I want a water break, but any questions so far? Anything else in the chat? Right. I always take silence for that. I'm doing a great job, so I'm just going to keep going. So the first chapter here, or section that we get into with the 8 steps of the model, is the strategic alignment. And you'll notice called out here in orange, and this visual is going to keep coming back over and over and over again in the playbook. I see it when I close my eyes at night at this point. So this model we're going to keep referencing, but strategic alignment here, and again, our bridge icon, every one of the 8 chapters that we're about to look at together is going to follow this exact same model. And not only this model, these eight steps of the model, but also the same layout for the rest of the chapter. And so it starts with this bridge and kind of the introduction of what do we actually mean by strategic alignment. And again, Amanda kind of hit on it already, right? We want everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. We want to make sure that our agency's strategic direction, mission, purpose is aligned with these workforce efforts, and that everybody's aware of what we're working on. So beyond the initial description within the chapter, then we get into elements. And this element section has multiple bullets. It varies on the number, depending upon which of the 8 steps we're on. And I want to be clear about this from the get-go is that, and we say it a couple of times right here, is that this is not an all-inclusive list. It's a starting point. It's just a jumping off point. These are 5 examples. I'm sure there are many other activities that we could all come up with that would fall under strategic alignment. But here are 5 that are great starting points for you all to use. And so these 5 elements then correspond into, again, we can see performance measures. That's the first of the 5 elements that we then take a deeper dive into. So again, we've got the chapters, explanation, elements, and then we get in depth with each of those elements. And although we skipped over it kind of quickly in that getting started, is the fact that you don't have to do every single one of these. You can pick and choose which ones maybe you've already done, which ones are more relevant for your agency. And that's why we wanted to provide a lot of options, but you don't have to do everything. So we then, like I said, explain what performance measures. We've got some different callouts here, helping reinforce the idea of what is a performance measure. Great payroll example here of employees getting timely error-free paychecks, and that being your numerator versus the number with issues. Denominator gives you your error rate. And just the idea of we need to measure these types of things, and we all know how important data is. But again, there's a great call out here is data is only as good as if you use it, right? It's one to collect it, but if you aren't using it in decision making, it's just an exercise in data collection. So certainly important thing here. And then I think a little further on, we get into, for again, each of those elements, once we get past the description of what actually it is, we then have 3 more sections for every one of these elements, kind of a quick guide to just jump in and understand what's going on here, some helpful hints, things to keep in mind when you're thinking about strategic alignment. And then the benefits, especially any of us who need to pitch this to leadership or working with executive teams and getting everybody on board. We wanted to call out some of those quick fact type things that are going to make selling this to anybody that much easier. So every element's got its quick guide, its helpful hints, and its benefits. A little bit more here about measuring performance, but then we get our first example of one of those DEI or KM boxes we talked about. And I think further on, we'll see one of the KM boxes, but we have a DEI example here, which again, kind of ties both that element of performance measuring with DEI efforts and making sure that how that applies into our workforce. And then it just keeps going. Another element right after that, following that same explanation, quick guide, some reference material there, helpful hints, benefits, more call outs, another dig deeper, or not dig deeper, but a reference link that's available. And so workforce SWOT analysis. And again, I'm not going into detail of what every one of these is, but again, just kind of hitting on the idea at a high level of that's how these chapters are set up. And the first one based off of that first step being strategic alignment. HR risk assessment, mitigation strategy, and then I think communication and collaborative strategy is the last of those 5. Again, just some reference material. And then we're on to chapter 2, or I guess step 2, organizational design review. And I guess we never figured this out, Amanda. Do you want to screen share or do you want me to just keep scrolling as you talk?
Let's go ahead and if you're comfortable scrolling, we can do that. I do want to reiterate a couple of points that Keith made. I think they're really important. And that is that this 8-step model is based off of the National Cooperative Highway Research Program domestic scan that was done in 2019 and 2020. And we have links in this PDF so that you can see that scan in its entirety. So there's additional information there. So when Keith mentioned that, we're just highlighting some of the elements that you can do in workforce management, that scan report has additional elements. And because we have it using the same model, it's pretty easy to say, oh, these are some other elements that we could look at for our agency. So we do encourage you to use that report from the scan in conjunction with the playbook. If you go through the playbook and say, this isn't quite the element that I need for my organization, there are some other examples out there. They just won't be laid out in this same format. So just wanted to share that with you. So let's talk just a little bit about organizational design review. As we scroll through, again, like Keith mentioned, the format is the same. We have that basic description, and then we move down into the elements. What you'll see here is before, between the elements and the list of elements and the detailed elements, we provide some examples. So when you see the excavator, sometimes the excavator will be taking you to a link. Sometimes it'll actually give you an example of what another DOT has done to do an organizational review. So here's an example of an organizational review that was done by a state DOT in the last 5 or 6 years. And these were the 6 steps that it went through. So look, whenever you see example, just recognize that that is an example from a DOT. And then we'll move through. So here we go in depth. Here's our first organizational design review element, which is inventorying and reviewing existing policies. And we have our knowledge management call out box. As Keith mentioned, I just want to build on that. Our second edition, we are looking for input from the KM committee and the Civil Rights Committee, the HR committee, to help us put more call out boxes in. We really want to help people see how DEI initiatives and programs and knowledge management programs intersect and interact with your workforce management plan. These are all 3 platforms that when you integrate them together, you have a much stronger and more effective overall workforce plan. So if you're interested, let us know, because we'll be reaching out to people, asking them for additional help in identifying those, where we can put more of those knowledge management and diversity, equity, and inclusion call out boxes. All right, let's keep moving. Workflow documentation and review. If you're already doing some type of process review, and some state DOTs have an office of performance management that includes like a group that does Lean or Six Sigma or Kaizen events, any type of a formal process review. This can be that formal process review. This might be where you're actually using, collaborating with that function in your DOT, or it may be something as simple as getting out Visio and mapping out some workflows of, first we start here and we go through here, and here are the decision points. So again, it doesn't have to be the super expensive, super elaborate workflow documentation program to get started. You can start with even hand-drawn workflows, and that can be really helpful. And then the box down at the bottom here, we give you an example of some information on the web you can find about hosting a Kaizen event, or what it looks like to have a Kaizen event, which is a type of business process review. Reporting structure analysis. Basically what we're looking at there is how are you organized in your org charts? You'd usually start with organizational charts. And we also, though, would look at ratios. I think, don't quote me, but I think it was Missouri, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. They went through and did a supervisor to direct report ratio study that was part of their reporting structure analysis. And it was really effective in helping them find efficiencies throughout their organization. All right, let's keep going. So we have also an organizational health assessment. We provide some examples here. Caltrans has done some organizational health assessments in recent years that we have some information on, but that may be a great resource if you want to dig deeper into organizational health assessment. And then we come to our current state. Before we go on, any questions about organizational design review before we move forward? Anything pop into your mind?
There's nothing in the chat, Amanda. I don't know if you are comfortable with people unmuting and asking at these pauses, or if you, sometimes it takes a minute to type.
Exactly. Yeah, if somebody wants to jump in, that's fine. If we get a number of people jumping in at once, then we'll go back to the chat. But I do want to just you know, something may be in your mind that you just want to really quick get out, and we want to encourage you to ask any questions. All right, we'll keep moving, but again, use the chat for questions if any come up. It's a lot of information in the playbook. We recognize that. Awesome. Thank you for the feedback. Appreciate that in the chat. It is a lot of information and we recognize that, but we do want to give you a feel for the playbook. And anytime you can reach out to me or to members of the subcommittee, and we'll help you if you have specific areas that you want to talk about. So the next step in the model is the current state. What we're really talking about here is taking a look at where you are today. And that current state is looking at the three lenses of workforce management. We mentioned them before. Workplace, work environment is the first one. Workforce is the second, and the nature of work is the third. So be thinking about that when we go through that current state. And if we move down past our, we'll go right into the elements. Yeah. So here we have quite a few elements that we're presenting. There are a lot of different ways to get information to identify what your current state is. The most common starting point are demographics. And here's an example of some demographics you can put together probably from your existing human resource system. And it's again laid out the same way. And we provide the link to the AASHTO salary survey because you may find some really helpful information there for your current state as well. Right here is an example. This is from the Alaska DOT and PF, that's Transportation and Public Facilities. And this is an example of a completed workforce demographic analysis. And so you can see here what we identified as our supply data for workforce, and then you'll see additional information on in the same format later in the playbook so that you can kind of walk through what a whole process looked like. Employee engagement surveys. There are a number of DOTs that are actively doing employee engagement surveys and then taking data from the survey to actually advance their workforce and move the agency forward. Great example, Washington State DOT has got a really robust employee engagement survey system they've been using for years as an example. The one thing I would caution with employee engagement surveys is as you go out, make sure that you know whether you're doing a job satisfaction survey or an employee engagement survey. They seem similar, but they are not interchangeable and they do gather different information. So if you're looking to, you know, hire someone to come in and do one, or if you're developing one on your own, I would encourage you to really do a little bit of research on the difference between satisfaction and engagement. For role designation, this isn't always really clear what we mean by role designation. What we're talking about here is looking at nature of work and how that work is allocated across your agency. So for example, do you have design engineers as well as construction engineers? Do you contract out your design? That would be looking at nature of work and what the roles are within your organization. And then how many positions are actually allocated to perform certain types of work. Analyzing internal factors. What we look at with internal factors is really taking a moment to say, what's the most important drivers for the way we are today? So it might be organizational culture. It might be our LMS system is pushing people toward learning certain things. It could be your legislature is funding only certain focal areas in your department. So it's important to know what those internal factors are that have helped you become who you are today as an organization. And then we move on to future state. I don't see any questions in the chat for current state, so we'll move to future state. Future state, current state is where we are today. Future state is really looking at where we want to be, where we need to get to. And so this is where we look at what does our future workforce need to look like in order to help us meet our mission. There's some really great information in here about the different types of futures that are out there. In most robust workforce management systems, they look at 4 futures: the possible, the plausible, the probable, and the preferred. This can be daunting for some agencies, and so you don't have to do all 4. Just like Keith mentioned earlier, you don't have to do every element, and you don't have to do every step in each element. It really is important to take a look at where your organization is so that you can customize it to what your agency needs. We do give extra information on environmental scans, just in case you want to go further with that environmental scan inside your agency. And then we go through what are the possible things we need to think about. Disruptions and opportunities. An excellent example of where you can go with this is available on the AASHTO website under the HR committee. If you look at presentations from previous annual meetings, there's a presentation that Virginia DOT gave about autonomous engineering and looking at the future nature of work. And that's a great example of what we're talking about here with looking at how you can predict what your future state might need to be. Just like you have internal factors, you also have to look at those external factors. How many people are coming out with civil engineering degrees, for example, if you have design and construction engineers on staff? And we can keep going, yeah. Oh, we already did that one. Okay, forecasting. Forecasting is a science in and of itself. It is different from people analytics and from data analytics, but it uses both of those scientific approaches to look at where we think the future is going, where the workforce is going to be in the future. What I would recommend for workforce forecasting is, if you haven't done it, see if you can't find a DOT who has, and set up a peer exchange or a collaborative group. The subcommittee has expressed interest in possibly providing future webinars on workforce forecasting. So just be aware, forecasting is a pretty sophisticated tool that you can use, and just want to make sure you know up front that that one's a little bit of a heavy lift if you decide to add it to your planning process. Any questions on future state before we go to gap analysis? I don't see any in the chat. Okay, so let's talk gap analysis. You may have noticed that 1, 2, 3, 4, this is the 5th step in an 8-step model, and we're still defining the problem. And that is the key to really effective workforce management. If you take the time up front to do the planning and the problem definition, you're going to have much more effective tools that you implement. So I can't state it enough times or strongly enough. Take the time to do the first 5 steps, and you'll be so much happier with the result that you get in your workforce plan. So gap analysis is where we get to say, here's our current state, and here's our future state, and how do we get our current state to our future state? That distance that you have to travel between current and future is your gap. So we want to look at that gap, and one of the main things we do in a gap analysis is, once we've identified it, we prioritize it. So let's move through and see what some of those steps are for gap analysis. The element we just talked about, identifying the gap. It's really important to make sure that we've clearly identified the gaps. And I encourage you to think outside of the normal gaps, which might be your vacancy factor or your training gaps. There can be other gaps as well, like gaps in your organizational culture that don't encourage learning, or gaps in your organizational culture that make diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts more difficult or easier. And so think about those types of gaps as well. Once you've identified all the gaps, then you actually begin to say, what are the needs that really are the most important for our agency? And you can think about the Pareto principle. That's the 80-20 rule. 20% of your effort can address 80% of your outcome. And so we want to really prioritize where are we going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Once we've identified the needs, we've identified the gaps, now we prioritize and say, these are the gaps we're going to close. It would be incredible if you're able to close every single gap you identify. So if you go in knowing that you really are going to have to pick and choose which ones to start with, it can make it much easier when you're developing your plan. And then we get to the action part. Addressing gaps is where we actually begin to solve the problem. Even though we've kind of been solving it all the way around through those first 5 steps by making sure we've identified what truly are our biggest priorities that we need to address.
And
We do have some, go ahead, Keith.
well, I was just going to say, for the sake of time, knowing we only had the hour, I'm going to hold you to the elements that are here, which spoilers are listed as I scroll, but this way I can scroll a little quicker and we'll keep it
Yep.
moving.
That sounds great. Yeah, so you've already done communication and collaboration in step 1. Now's the time to actually make it work. And we do want to think about our technologies and our different programs. This is where we start saying we want to do a better recruitment program, or we want a more effective retention program. This is where you're actually connecting your HR tools to your workforce plan. And we have a tool inventory of HR tools that provides examples from many different DOTs across the nation. And so that will also be a resource available after July for DOTs to see some examples of the different types of tools you might use to close your gaps. All right, we're ready for document. In this 7th step, the SCAN was adamant that we needed to include this step because they said what often happens with workforce management planning is that it doesn't get documented, and then it's really difficult to implement it completely. And then you might see elements getting implemented, but not an entire plan. So this does give you tips and pointers about what to do to actually document your plan and then make it become a reality. Lots of project management in this part. Our final step is to monitor, evaluate, and refine. Once you've documented and implemented your plan, the key here now is to be able to take those measures and tie connect the results of the plan with the agency's ability to meet its mission. And so that's where really you're justifying the existence of the plan. You're able to see what's working and what's not working, so you know where you need to make adjustments or changes. And it also lets you identify new priorities for when you update the plan in the future. Keith.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Amanda. But wait, there's more. In the appendices. Appendices? Appendices. One of those. Got to write one of those times. Appendix A, we've got a glossary of terms. We're throwing a lot out here at people and certainly wanted to make it easy as a reference point in case people weren't sure about something. But probably my favorite of all the appendixes is B, which is our begin the journey checklist. And again, tying it back to that 8-step model, we have a section for each one of these. And this is a great, if you remember that quick start guide that we had at the beginning, we basically said, okay, skim the first 2 sections and then jump here and just dive right in. And then we immediately followed it up with a bunch of rules about take your time and work through it and don't work quickly. But from here, we give you a checklist of, again, what we are highlighting as going to be the most impactful and quick, easy ways to tackle each of those 8 steps. Here's your objectives. Here's your checklist. And you may not hit every one of these. Again, you can identify which one of these makes sense for your agency or a couple of these. You don't have to do just one. And some might not at all, and others are you might already have, and you can immediately cross them off. But so we went through and really, again, for all 8 of them, kind of took that let's condense it down and give you a quick reference page checklist to keep track of what those steps are and what you can quickly do in each of those areas. And then beyond that, again, I mentioned earlier, Appendix C has a project charter, and this came from Christine Hetzel and Vermont Agency of Transportation. We've put this together as we've been working through our strategic workforce plan as kind of a project charter template here for you. Appendix D, just getting into some organizational theory about teams and organizations on a whole and chain of command. A couple other things to keep in mind here in Appendix E. And then last but not least, because we had to, our reference section. So everything, if you really want to ever go down any of the rabbit holes and dig deep into where we referenced emotional intelligence or workforce readiness from Oswald. So also the HR tools that Amanda mentioned coming in July. Second edition of the playbook, we'll put the link in here, but again, a bunch of different links and great sources, reference samples, tools, reports, all sorts of information available for you here. And that, with a few minutes left for questions, is the Transportation Workforce Management Playbook. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions.
We have our first question from April Meadows. Would the committee be open to webinars or knowledge cafes about some specific areas listed in the playbook? For example, some state DOTs that have had success with improving organizational culture or employee engagement and share those practices?
Yeah, so my knee-jerk reaction is to say absolutely we would do that. But I'm not going to commit Brandy or Christine, without inviting them to weigh in and say yay or nay.
Well, what I would say is that, the AASHTO structure is defined, that's one of the great benefits of AASHTO membership and participation. And so while we don't necessarily have anything planned beyond the 2 webinars and the July meeting, I do think that there's opportunity for us as a body or as a community, state DOT community with like problems and challenges, that is something that that we could certainly consider as a subcommittee and as we develop our action plan for the future. But we're a new subcommittee, and we are really proud of this product that has been developed. But I do think that there's room for us to consider future opportunities that you described. Christine?
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. And I'll just share, so for the June webinar, the 3 states are going to be sharing their workforce plans. And I will share with you that there are specific things in the Vermont plan around culture and engagement. So I think you're going to start to see this unpacked because, as April is so accurately asking about, this is important. And this is some of the topics that should come out of a strategic workforce plan are what are those initiatives to do activities that improve measurable things that improve organizational culture and engagement. So April, I hope you come back in our June webinar because I think you might get some tips and tricks there. Thanks.
You're such a tease.
Exactly.
Clarice also notes that the Committee on HR will be presenting a number of employee engagement sessions and have a roundtable discussion scheduled on the topic as well during the 2023 conference in Long Beach in July. They'll be sharing a detailed agenda with those session titles the first week of June, so watch for that.
Great. What other questions, comments, or information would you like to share?
I have lots of comments thanking you all for your hard work and the great resource. Looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar and the July meeting. So just so you're aware, everyone is very thankful. Great job.
Wonderful. Well, we really wanted a tool that people could use and apply. We wanted it to be accessible rather than, you know, a 400-page document that would be great to hold your door open, but maybe really hard to get through. So hopefully this is helpful. As I mentioned before, we will have a copy of the playbook available online with a recording of this session. So we do want to make sure people have that before the workshop. We really encourage you to come to the conference and join us at the workshop. It's 4 hours with some subject matter experts. We're going to sit down and just work through where you're at as a DOT and where you want to get to, and give you some practical experience with mapping out where you need to go or what you might want to be working on. And I also wanted to let you all know that the June workshop will be presented jointly by Vermont, Minnesota, and Utah. So you'll get to see some of your colleagues who are going through the work right now and ask them some pointed questions about what they've experienced and what you might expect as you launch on your journey, or if you're already on the journey, where you might want to do a little course correction or move in a new direction. So hopefully this has been helpful. Christine or Brandy, anything to add? Keith, anything to add for our closing remarks?
I'll just say I'm super happy, excited that it's out there. We did it. Yay. Final version, and happy to share it with everybody.
Look forward to the next webinar where we can unpack it even further. Christine?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just share, so if you're sitting there thinking like, holy cow, like that seems like a lot, where do I get started? We're really hoping that at the June webinar, and when you can see the 3 different states and their approach, what we learned as we collaborated together and kind of went off in very different directions, following the same model, is that all of us as DOTs are mature in some areas in our workforce and immature in others. And shockingly, all different and yet similar challenges. So we're really hoping by seeing some concrete examples that you'll see any one of us can do this. We start with what we have, we start with the data that we have, and we write as mature of a plan as we can with the resources we have and with the support that we have from our leaders, and then we grow from there. And then it gets better and more mature every year or 2 that we work on it. So if you're just feeling a little bit overwhelmed, just start. Just start with what you have and start seeing what fits into these different categories. And it just was a lot more attainable to me once I really sat down and started working the plan than when we were first building the playbook. It just seemed like it was out of our maturity reach, and it really wasn't, and it's not out of yours either. So hang in there, we can do this together.
All right, Clarice, anything you want to add before we close down our webinar for the day?
Hi, Amanda. I have nothing to add. This has just been so impressive. I know you all have been working so hard on this effort, and I'm truly excited. I think that between now and our meeting in Long Beach, it will be even more impressive. So we look forward to being involved.
Great. Wonderful. All right. Thank you all for sharing this time with us. And like we said, please feel free to reach out if you have questions, and we'll see you in June for our next webinar.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.